He had been known as the gentle giant of the ridge, always the first to nudge a frightened foe into standing. When Rusty vanished, Blaze stopped greeting the sunrise. He fixed his gaze on the far ridge and would not eat. The silence felt like a question that only he could answer. By morning, the wooden gate lay in splinters. The staff found only hoofprints leading away. He crossed open plains alone, following a memory that felt like a compass. People told stories of impossible loyalty, but no one had seen a horse push so far. He found him, a small, rusted shed, a muzzled dog curled beneath a tarp, ribs showing. When the man raised a stick, Blay didn't think. He exploded forward, hooves pounding, a wall of muscle and light that refused to let the past be broken again.
When Blee vanished from the ridge, the sanctuary staff feared the worst, but they refused to give up. Natalie organised search parties and taped flyers while Jake drove the old truck along every rutted road, eyes scanning every rusted shed and abandoned lot. The heat bent the horizon into mirages, and as hours bled into a desperate afternoon, they found the broken fence with splinters snagged like a memory across the sand. Blee had left a trace, and that trace pointed to the only place his instincts would lead him. While the sanctuary readied for the worst, Blee travelled by a map written in scent and memory. Night swallowed him, but the moon lit a path that refused to be mistaken. He crossed 2 washes and a rail line, skirted a mesa rim, and never once paused for his own thirst. If a bond could be a compass, his was true north. The shed's roof was corrugated and the door hung crooked, the track out front bearing the scars of someone who had spent a life trying to control what was wild. Rusty lay inside where flies kept a brutal vigil, ribs showing, eyes that had been taught to look away from help. When Blee arrived, he stamped and neighed like a bell split by grief and hope. His presence turned the shed from prison to stage. Grant Mallory stepped from the truck like a shadow that owned the place, a short stick clenched in his hand and a hardness in his jaw that had learned to ignore pleas. He snapped orders and tugged what he thought was his to command. Rusty's small body folded under the leash's cruel geometry. The air tightened. A single raised stick was the fragile hinge between cruelty and rescue. That second is the one the world dislikes losing, the instant everyone waits for violence or salvation, and Blee answered with an answer that had no hesitation. Blee struck the air with a thunder that felt like ancient weather. He reared and kicked, a surge of motion that ripped the shed's quiet apart. The stick never fell. It clattered away as if the desert itself refused to be party to that choice. The man staggered back as if the animal had become a force larger than his history of control. Natalie and Jake arrived in a cloud of dust, breathless, phones already recording because some things the world ought to see. They called the authorities, and the voices that had been small and frightened found thunder in other people. Commands, shouts, the sound of a life being reclaimed. Grant was detained. Hands that had once guided cruelty were cuffed by strangers who would not look away. Rusty, shaking and slow, crawled into the space Blee had made and leaned his weight against the horse's flank as if repaying a debt in the only currency he had. Trust. Back at the sanctuary, the work of healing moved like careful weather. Rusty drank until he coughed and then slept like someone relearning the shape of rest. Antibiotics and warm towels and the whispered names of volunteers stitched him back together. Blee stood sentinel day and night, his head low lips brushing the dog's shoulder in a language older than words. Visitors came with cameras and questions, but the real audience was smaller. The 2 animals who had tied their days together and would not be untied. People who had once called Blee merely a quiet horse saw him differently when he nudged a trembling Rusty up the ramp, when he refused to move away at night, when he flattened his body so the dog could curl against the steady warmth of his side. The story spread not because it wanted an ending, but because it offered a truth people recognized. Kindness circles back. Weeks later, when Rusty ran with a wobble that softened into strength, kids at the sanctuary learned that bravery isn't always about speed or size. They fed treats and scrubbed hooves and listened to the tale told again and again, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that rescue is a promise kept by those who remember being saved. Donations helped rebuild the fence stronger than before. and the volunteers painted the gate the colour of sunrise so that every new arrival would see it as both threshold and safe. Blee and Rusty grazed with a companionship that was quiet and absolute. When wind came down from the ridge, it carried their names like a hymn. The sanctuary began to post subtle updates, quiet proof that the world could act when cruelty was exposed. In the end, the moment people replayed most was small. Rusty placing his head on Blee's flank while a volunteer wiped at his eyes and the horse lowered his head in a slow, deliberate bow. It was not a victory shot so much as a punctuation mark on a sentence of loyalty. Those who witnessed it carried the picture out into their day, an image that made them call friends, that made them spare a moment or $1, that made them click subscribe because they wanted to be part of the next rescue. The man who had tried to break Spirit met a system that held him accountable. The animals met hands that would not let them go. If there is any lesson left when the credits of this small true story roll, it is this: rescue can begin with one pair of brave hooves, and the debt of kindness is repaid, not because it must be, but because it remembers what mercy felt like. If you want to help more stories like this have endings that matter, consider supporting local rescues, sharing the story with friends, or coming by to meet the animals who taught us that loyalty moves mountains, crosses deserts, and sometimes breaks a gate to set the world right again.